This is lecture 94 in the ABCs of Communism. These lectures are supporting the volume 7 when it appears later this year on Communism in Europe. Our topic now is lecture 94 is Primitive Communism in the Italian Paleolithic. Now, Italy contains several early Paleolithic archaeological sites equivalent to the Iberian and French Lower Paleolithic, as for example at the archaeological sites at Atapuerca, at Burgos in Spain, at Rio Seco Cave at Tattavel in France, and in Italy we have excellent research and visitor facilities at both Isernia, La Pineta, and Nota Arcanico, comparable to the Apulian sites of Olorgesailie in Kenya and Gambori II at Melka Kuntur in Ethiopia. For that reason, and for our purposes, I shall concentrate on these lower Paleolithic sites in our examination of primitive communism on the Italian peninsula. Now, the Italian lower Paleolithic begins around 1 million years ago. The best archaeological sites now are at Ca Belvedere di Monte Pogliolo in Emilia-Romagna, Ceprano, Colle Marino, and Arce in southern Latium. By 700,000 BP, the archaeological evidence shows that people of the lower Paleolithic had occupied the entire Italian peninsula. Excavations at 2 central Italian locations have brought to light early settlement stages in Italy that provide the best diagnostic picture of. One of them is at Isernia La Pineta in Molise, along the western border of the Isernia Basin in the lower range of the Apennines. Another one is located at Notar Chirico in Basilicata within the Venosa Basin. Let's take a look first at Isernia La Pineta. In 1978, the deposit at Isernia La Pineta was discovered during road work. Resulting archaeology produced 4 lower Paleolithic layers and a preliminary report on the paleo-environmental features of the site. The closeness to a regularly flooding stream and volcanic events contributed to good preservation at a datable site that was covered by silt and clay flood deposits, alternating then with volcanic tuff. Now, many stone tools were found in the archaeological levels. Mainly, these are choppers and flint and limestone flake tools in association with the remains of many animals. The vertebrate paleontological fossils include the remains of bison, bears, boars, cervids, caprids, and pachyderms, such as elephants, rhinos, and hippos, as well as birds, such as wild ducks and dabchiks, small rodents, turtles, and fishes. Sedimentary paleontological and paleontological research has established an environmental context of large prairies accompanied by marshlands and forests on nearby mountains. In short, it was an area rich in wildlife and suitable for the survival of prehistoric humans. During the excavation, no fossil remains of Homo of any species were found. Now, during 600,000 years ago, there is a 2-meter wide structure made of small limestone blocks with many stone tools and animal remains. There is now a museum and exhibiting area at Isernia La Pineta where excavations are currently in progress, and these are open to the public, like 2 such exhibiting museums in Los Angeles, California. Notar Chirico. The Paleolithic site there was found in 1979 in the upper part of the hill, bearing the same name on the border of the Venosa Basin. Excavations were conducted between 1980 and 1995 in the sedimentary series deposited during the mid-Pleistocene. These sediments are fluvio-lacustrine, that is river and lake, and volcanic. They contain 11 sequential cultural levels from the lower Paleolithic. Correlation with volcanic deposits established a relatively narrow time range of 200,000 years from 650,000 BP, a period featuring transition toward a colder climate. Now, the prairie-like environment with sparse trees and several wildlife species had among it elephants, followed by cervids, bovines, and rhinos. People had begun exploiting a broad spectrum of smaller animals as well, including rabbits, turtles, and birds. Now, there remains show an abundance of these smaller animals. Associated stone tools include choppers and flake tools and bifaces. The investigators classified these tools as belonging to an archaic Acheulean phase in southern Italy. The alpha level is the most recent in the series, dating 450,000 years ago in an exposed 100 square meter area. A fragment of a human femur was found at this level and is the oldest human fossil found so far in southern Italy, with a dating of 359,000 BP by the uranium disequilibrium method. The B level of 30 square meters contains the remnants of an elephant skull with the tusks still in place, together with several bifaces, choppers, and flint and limestone scrapers. The sequential archaeological layers were left in situ and were protected by a structure including several didactic panels for the public that was visiting this area for several years. The museum structure is in the portion envisaging the creation of a prehistoric park in the Venosa Basin. The adjacent Paleolithic site of Loreto is only 700 meters away, and now we want to review the most important remaining known lower Paleolithic manifestations on the peninsula, beginning in the Po River Valley. Now, thousands of Paleolithic era artifacts have been recovered from the nearby area of Ca Belvedere, that is short for Casa Belvedere, and dated to 1 million to 850,000 years BP by electron spin resonance. Now that's the oldest evidence for human habitation in Italy. At that time, the topography was quite different than it is today, and the Po Valley was a gulf of the Mediterranean Sea. The recovered foraminifera, ostracods, and mollusks indicate a marine coastal environment near freshwater and brackish swamps. The archaeological level contains core choppers and flint flake tools. Then in Trieste, human remains have been found in excavation conducted in the lower section of the Fisogliano Dolina at Trieste in Italy. They are teeth and a fragment of particularly robust mandible that for their morphological and morphometrical characters, which the investigators attribute to archaic Homo sapiens. The lithic industry is formed by flakes, carinated projectile points, scrapers, choppers, and chopping tools, characteristic of what they label the Italian pebble culture. Sediments, pollen, and faunal remains indicate that this part of the deposit was formed during the interglacial climatic conditions of an early phase of the Middle Pleistocene, that is isotopic stadium 13 or 11, or in more traditional terms, the Mindel glaciation, about 350,000 BP. Now, Torre in Pietra in Roman Latium. Available as a technological and typological analysis of the Acheulean and early Middle Paleolithic assemblages from Torre in Pietra in central Italy's Roman Latium. The small tool blanks of the Acheulean were either pebbles or thick flakes with some cortex. They provided a relatively easy handling material. Together with the comparisons of the Acheulean small tools of Castel de Guido, there are dates by potassium argon and the uranium series that support a lower Paleolithic correlation to marine isotope stage MIS-10. Now, the lower Paleolithic horizon is followed by a middle Paleolithic level wall assemblage that was an innovation characterized by the production of thin flake blanks without cortex. Level wall thin flake blanks in the middle Paleolithic assemblage suggest that the new technology was originating in the lower Paleolithic time with the emergence of hafting. Accordingly, the oldest direct evidence of hafting technology is from the site of Campitello Quarry in Tuscany, that is central Italy, where birch bark tar, found on the proximal part of two flint flakes, is dated to the end of MIS-7. Now, this is an important feature of the industrial assemblage at Torre in Pietra, that is the continuing presence of small tool blanks on pebbles and cores and on thick flakes. Albeit they occur at a much lower frequency in the Middle Paleolithic at Torre in Pietra, nevertheless they are proof of technological evolution from the older Acheulean industries of the lower Paleolithic. Another site from Roman Latium is Fontana Ranuccio, where pebble stone tools and Acheulean artifacts have been excavated in a lime layer dated at 458,000 BP by potassium argon. The pebble tool assemblage is of small flint tools and well-made microliths, as well as tools made from elephant and bovine bone. They are in association with slaughtered macaques, deer, and bears. The soprano skull is a Middle Pleistocene archaic human fossil skull cap accidentally unearthed in a highway construction project in 1994 near Soprano in the province of Frosinone, Italy. Its age is between 900 and 800,000 years ago. Now, Piero Nord. The Piero 13 karst fissure at Calva dell'Erba at the town of Apricena in the Italian province of Foggia contains a vertebrate assemblage. The Piero Nord faunal unit is associated with stone tools attributable to Mode 1 of early Paleolithic technology of pebble cores and flakes. The faunal unit corresponds to the last Villafranchian, and thus the tools and fauna are dated between 1.6 and 1.3 million years ago. These lower Paleolithic artifacts are in association with the vertebrate assemblage. That Piero Nord assemblage includes many species of amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. The investigators say that the lithic assemblage is characterized by a high degree of opportunism and by the exclusive presence of debitage reduction sequences. Now, in the Middle Paleolithic mode of production, there was an ideological superstructure. People of the Middle Paleolithic in Italy underwent a revolution in their technology, with a multitude of new tool types appearing in the archaeological record. This is a reflection. This expanded procurement strategy had evolved into broad-spectrum wild resource exploitation with many new tool types to do the jobs involved, and accordingly we should ask the question as to how this affected their social organization, if it did at all. I believe University of Arizona professors Stephen Kuhn's and Mary Steiner's idea that the intensified division of labor by sex occurred in the Upper Paleolithic rather now than in the Middle Paleolithic is correct, although the eventual Upper Paleolithic increasing efficiency in production was a result rather than an original cause. The driving force in the socio-cultural evolution of primitive communism is the need not to daily create surplus social product, and in this case the primary cause would have been an outcome of gender-based sodality discussions. That is, men's and women's clubs gave women the chance to focus on certain things, men on other things. Among these topics of their club discussions would have been the sexual division of labor. These sewing circle hunting lodge bullshit sessions eventually justified such a division of labor. Their conclusions were eventually codified into ideological clauses. This would have taken the time of the mature Middle Paleolithic to work out over generations. By the Upper Paleolithic, people had done so. Now this was continuing technological sophistication throughout the Middle Paleolithic that again exploded in the Upper Paleolithic. Thus the broad-spectrum, wild resource exploitation economy was heading toward its maximum efficiency. This meant lots of free time for each of the band and tribe members to devote to their non-productive lives, including more time in sodality discussions. There is ample reason to see the contemporary or ethnographic division of labor by age and sex in the last 45,000 years. This gender division of labor should have started and matured in the Middle Paleolithic, talking among them that accompanied the broad-spectrum wild resource exploitation revolution as was completed by the beginning of the Upper Paleolithic. Now, in central Italy, the Middle Paleolithic is known from Monte del Goi, and then I give the appropriate latitude and longitudes for that, and for Sedia del Diavolo. These are the two oldest known archaeological sites within the city of Rome, that is, Latium, Italy. The lithic assemblages from these two sites were the basis of the definition of the Proto-Pontinian by M. Tascini, which she viewed as a late Middle Pleistocene industry very similar to the later Upper Pleistocene Pontinian industries thought to be characteristic of the Latium Mysterion. The chronostratigraphic framework of the Anine River deposits has been recently updated, and the lithic assemblages from these sites
are now confidently dated between 295 and 290,000 years ago, close to the transition from MIS 9 to MIS 8, and they fit chronologically between the industries of layers M and D from Torre in Pietra, 26 kilometers northwest of Rome. The presence of the Levallois debitage is indisputable, yet it occurs within an original technical context different from what is known in other occurrences of the Levallois. The date confirms the proposed chronology for the early Levallois in Europe. More importantly, these two assemblages demonstrate that this technology can emerge in more diversified context than usually described. This suggests that its dispersal in Europe may have been rapid. Lithic assemblages at the time, considered Rician in age, that is of the Riss glacial, according to Tascini, these assemblages were made on small flint pebbles. Made on small flint pebbles characterized by a high proportion of standardized side scrapers, mostly with Keenan-like retouch, the presence of blanks with faceted platforms and centripetal cores, and a few with prepared platforms. The knapping techniques were direct percussion and the bipolar technique. According to Tascini, these characters show clear similarities to the Upper Pleistocene Mysterion industries in the Latium region, also made on small flint pebbles called Pontian. And then I give the sites, or she does. This, she suggested, that Cedillo del Diavolo and Monte delle Gioie were the direct descendants of the Pontinian and called them Proto-Pontinian. The absence of Levallois debitage at both sites was noted by Piperno and Bidetu, and their view was retained in the literature. Higher up, there is an earlier Middle Paleolithic assemblage in level D, dated between 270 and 240,000 years ago, at the very beginning of MIS 7. Thus, the industries from SDD and MDG are chronologically intermediate between the MIS 10 Acheulean and the earlier MIS 7 Middle Paleolithic at level D at Torre in Pietra. The artifacts and fauna from these sites include 2 hominid remains and are assigned to Neanderthals, now confidently dated close to the transition from MIS 9 to MIS 8, that is 295 to 290,000 years ago, and may be seen as a very old, if not the oldest evidence of early Middle Paleolithic in Italy. And that brings us to Verona, Italy, and the Fumani Cave, on the southern edge of the Veneto Prealps in the north of Italy, where we have a dated sequence for the Middle to Upper Paleolithic. Excavations have been conducted since 1988 beyond the present-day drip line and in the cave entrance. This is an area where Middle and Upper Paleolithic levels with a well-preserved Mysterion and an organization living floors are in good states of preservation. It's also a part of Italy that I explored when in U.S. Army Military Intelligence in 1961-62. At any rate, the sequence documents the main climatic events that occurred during the last glacial cycle from 90,000 to 30,000 years ago, affecting human settlement patterns. Its significance for our purpose is that it provides the evidence for the transition from initial broad-spectrum wild resource exploitation to a far more advanced version, and that evidence being thousands of flint flakes and cores, bones, teeth, charcoal, warped pebbles, bone retouching tools, and hammers. This assemblage proves that people lit fire, manufactured stone tools, butchered ungulates, carnivores, and birds, and manufactured clothing from hides and pelts. From the Aurignacian forward, there are dwelling structures, lithic assemblages, bone and antler tools, painted stones, and pierced molluscan shells. This Upper Paleolithic cultural sequence at the Fumani Cave continues until 12,000 BP. That brings us to the Upper Paleolithic at Riparo del Mare. The Gravettian covers some 10,000 years, from about 20,000 BP at the beginning of the last Verm stadial to about 10,000 BP at the end of Dryas III and the beginning of the Holocene. It has been divided into 3 phases: the early phase from 28,000 to 16,000 BP, the evolved phase from 16 to 14,000 BP, and the final phase from 14 to 10,000 BP. The evolved and final Epigravettian have 5 regional phases: northern Tyrrhenian, central and southern Tyrrhenian, northern and central Adriatic, the southern Adriatic, and the Sicilian. The site of Riparo del Mare yielded numerous flint, bone, and shell artifacts, as well as faunal and botanical remains from the late Upper Paleolithic, or the late Epigravettian culture, 16 to 12,000 BP, occupation of the Alps region. It contains 267 stones painted with anthropomorphic, zoomorphic, and geometric designs. There are ground stone tools at Riparo del Mare. These groundstone artifacts were employed in hide treatment, as well as in the production of some of the painted stone artifacts. You will note, of course, that the invention of grounded polished stone tools of the Mesolithic and Neolithic Revolution has this origin in the technological component of culture. And at Rio Seco Cave in the northern Adriatic regions, including the Venetian region and the Dalmatian coast, there are late Middle Paleolithic settlements recorded in a few sites, and even fewer Middle to Upper Paleolithic occupations. The single most important site for the Middle to Paleolithic occupation in the northern Adriatic region is Rio Seco Cave. It is situated at the foot of the Carnic Prealps. Chronometric data make Rio Seco the essential site regarding the diffusion of the mid-upper Paleolithic culture at the border of the Alpine region. As for the Gravettian, it occurs in the southern end of the Italian peninsula, around 28,000 BP. In northern Italy, at Rio Seco Cave, the Gravettian layer ranges from 29,390 to 28,995 BP. The appearance of Gravettian in eastern Italy is contemporaneous with several sites in Central Europe, and the chronological date supports the hypothesis that the Swabian Gravettian came from eastern Austria. Numerous sites throughout the Italian peninsula and the western Balkans document key events between the late Middle Paleolithic and the mid-Upper Paleolithic, focusing on the northern Adriatic Sea rim, which includes the Venetian region and the Dalmatian coast. The millennia preceding the demise of Homo sapiens neanderthalensis are recorded in very few sites which displayed data of variable relevance. Settlement patterns reflect economic activity in the mountain districts. Sheltered sites were repeatedly used to accomplish types of complex tasks or for short-term occupations, as shown by the distribution of stone tool production areas. Flint availability determined the organization of site locations. Human land use varied accordingly. Even scarcer in this area is the archaeological evidence of the mid to upper Paleolithic, a period better known along the Tyrrhenian Sea and the southern Adriatic coast, where evidence of intense Gravettian occupation can be found. One of the most debated issues is whether the Gravettian developed from a local origination or results from immigration or cultural diffusion through various corridors between European regions. Alternatively, as I suspect from culture contact, the northern Adelian evidence of the role of two possible passageways, or from the west in France and one from the east in the Balkans, seem to me to suggest the latter. Having lived in northern Italy for 2 years, I am prejudiced in the direction of culture contact. Anyway, the earliest Italian Gravettian is documented around 28,000 by radiocarbon in Paleolithic Cave in the southern end of the peninsula, and the majority of the sites adjacent to the two Italian coasts are dated 26 to 24,000 by radiocarbon. Now, the earliest Middle to Upper Paleolithic all along the Tyrrhenian coast has lithic assemblages, and they are described at the Mochi rock shelter and La Cala cave, and they suggest an influence from the French Gravettian. In contrast, the conspicuous Gravettian evidence from Paleolithic cave in the South Adriatic area shows discrepancy with the Tyrrhenian belt from a technological point of view. This indication suggests signatures of cultural influence from a possible eastern route, starting from the Carpathian Basin and crossing the Trans-Adriatic region when the sea level was 260 feet lower than the present day. Nevertheless, evidence across the Adriatic coast is still too scanty at fewer sites, such as the Broyon rock shelter, Fonte del Montinate, and Pagliacci Cave. Moreover, Pagliacci need not be essential to understand the issue of the local development of Italian Gravettian, because Aurignacian and early Gravettian assemblages neither show an abrupt change with transitional or formative diagnostics. On the other hand, the cave of Rio Seco in the northern Adriatic region provides evidence of the late Mysterion and the earliest Gravettian, new radiometric dates on bone and charcoal samples, and the geographic setting between the upper Adriatic plain and the pre-Alps. Rio Seco Cave reflects on mobility patterns. Paleolithic hunter-gatherers could easily have moved through the corridor between the Italian peninsula and the Carpathian basin. Rio Seco Cave is in the northeastern portion of the Italian peninsula, near the village of Clausetto, Pordenone, at 1,900 feet above sea level, on the Pratus Plateau in the eastern part of the Carnic Prealps. The Pratus Plateau is an area of 6 square kilometers enclosed on 3 sides of mountains, peaking from 3,765 feet to 4,490 feet, and to the south by the foothills, facing the present-day Friulian plain. Rio Seco Cave is a large, sheltered cave opening on the left slope of a stream gorge at 66 feet above the present-day stream bed. Facing south, the shelter had a wide and flat roof derived from the collapse of large slabs of stratified limestone. The sheltered area is enclosed from the outside by a ridge of large boulders, and the cave opens in the middle of the wall and continues as a gallery for 39 feet until the sediments completely fill it up. In the outer area, the fill forms a mass-wasting deposit, thickening along the present-day drip line, where the boulders define the original extension of a vast roof. In 2002, investigators found a Paleolithic settlement Rio Seco Cave. Archaeological excavation has been conducted at the site and is continuing since 2010. The cave has sedimentary levels grouped into major stratigraphic units separated by erosional discontinuities, and 2 units throw new light on the matter. Unit 1 are the Mysterion layers and Gravettian Flint artifacts. The Mysterion radiocarbon dates run from 49,000 to 44,560 pp. The Gravettian layer ranges from 29,390 to 28,995 BP by radiocarbon, and the use of level wall and discoid technologies and scrapers of variable type and size and flakes characterize the Mysterion assemblages, including a scraper shortened by distal truncation and thinned on the dorsal face, and a core edge removal flake from a discoid core, bladelet core, double scraper shortened by a proximal truncation. In addition, there is a level wall centripetal core. Gravettian implements include a burin with refitted burin swallow and end scraper on a large retouched flake and an unfinished backed point, as well as a double truncated backed bladelet. There are unipolar flakes and centripetal flakes and cores of discoid technology and core edge removal flakes and pseudo level wall points and retouched tools, mostly scrapers. Level wall and discoid flakes, short blades, and short bladelet cores make up the remainder of the assemblage. Discontinuity, composed of stones and foamy fine fraction with scattered Mysterion flint implements, bones, and charcoals, separates the layers. Marmots live there as demonstrated by bones and an articulated marmot skeleton found within the tunnels, several burrows, and dens. And then there's Unit 2. The archaeology is now Upper Paleolithic, with a few bone retouching tools and a handful of pieces technologically characterized by bladelet production. The tools are 3 burins on truncations made on blades, and 1 is a bladelet core. In addition, there are 2 end scrapers produced on cortical flakes, one of which is thick and large, and among the projectile points are 1 backed by truncated bladelet, 1 possibly unfinished backed point, and 1 undeterminable backed fragment. Evidence for the use of fire is found as tiny dispersed charcoals, burnt bone, heat-affected flints, and 2 hearths. The backed pieces of the burials result from short-term occupation by hunter-gatherers equipped with previously retouched tools made of high-quality flints collected outside the Carnic Prealps. Every stratigraphic unit contained animal bone remains. Diagnostic signatures in the form of dens, chambers, and articulated skeletons document the colonization of the cave by marmots, and there are fewer fossil remains in the Gravettian layers in comparison with the Mysterion. The ungulates are caprids, Capra ibex and Rupacapra rupacapra. The bison are Bison priscus and Bison primigenius. Traces of human modification on the bones include cut marks on shafts of caprids, partly combusted, and on a marmot clavicle. One partially burned epiphysis of the scapula of castor fiber is hearth-associated. In the Mysterion sequence, carnivores, that is, brown bears, cave bears, mustelids, and canids, predominate over the ungulates. Occurring secondarily are caprids, that is, chamois and ibex, bovids and cervids such as red deer, roe deer, elk, and wild boar. Human preference for ungulates is proven by cut marks on red deer. Ursa species bones show butchering, skinning, and the deliberate fracturing of long bones. The assemblages of forest environment and a marsh somewhere in the vicinity in the mountain woodlands. Cave bears were well adapted to this kind of environment and used caves for hibernation. The appearance of the early Gravettian in Europe predates the last phases of the Ordination. To the north of the Alps, the key Swabian Gravettian facies include the lithic assemblages of the Geibenkasterli, Sergenstein, Rillenhole, Weinbergholen, and Willendorf sites that are comparable with the Rio Seco age range. In Central Europe, between northern Austria, Moravia, and southern Poland, is a second early Gravettian industry named the Pavlovian. Type sites are Dolny v. Stonis 2, Pavlov 1, Predmosti 1, and Krems, and are contemporaneous with Rio Seco Layer 6. This variant differs from the Swabian Gravettian due to the presence in the toolkit of geometric microliths, microburins, and Pavlovian points. Furthermore, in the Italian peninsula, local variants of the Gravettian have not yet been recorded. The similarities documented in the lithic assemblages of level 23 of Paglici Cave and Kostiaki 8-2 are of the broader Gravettian known in Central Europe. The Rio Seco site points to 2 natural corridors used to reach the Italian peninsula: the Adriatic southern coast from Croatia and the bridge to the northeast from the Carpathian regions. In conclusion, at the junction between the North Adriatic Plain and the Eastern Alps, the chronometric refinement of a new site in the Rio Seco Cave contributes to enhance the investigation of the prehistoric human occupation during the mid to late Pleistocene. Although not completely explored, Rio Seco Cave fills an important chronological gap and preserves an archive of potential interest for understanding the study of the late Homo sapiens neanderthalensis and the dispersal of mid-upper Paleolithic populations and the diffusion of Gravettian culture. Nevertheless, the new set of dates does not cover the millennia of the Middle-Upper Paleolithic transition in the second half of MIS 3, a period chronometrically secured from key sequences in neighboring regions. Before claiming human, ecological, or economic factors leading to this dearth of evidence, more data are required from the study of the stratigraphic sequence. The detection of possible stops in the gradation processes of the cave deposit, which may have produced alterations, consolidations, weathering, or alternatively erosions, could explain the complete removal of traces of Aurignacian occupations. The Gravettian archaeological record at Rio Seco Cave is scarce compared with the Mysterion. The emergence of the early Gravettian in eastern Italy is contemporaneous with the Swabian Gravettian and the Pavlovian. The rockfall that occurred after the late Middle Paleolithic probably made the Gravettian foragers place their settlement under the present-day rock shelter just in front of the cave entrance. The broad expanse of the Swabian Gravettian and Pavlovian industrial assemblages happened because of hunter-gatherer mobility and resulting efficient transport of exogenous raw materials from as far as 160 miles from the source quarry. Culturally determined migration resulted in the spread of the Gravettian innovation and its assimilation in the modes of production of nearby regions. Rio Seco radiometric dates support the hypothesis of dispersal of the Swabian Gravettian, probably from eastern Austria. And that brings us to a conclusion of today's lecture.